Welcome to this BloombergQuint conversation on the future of cloud powered by HeroWire. My name is Ivor Soanes and I'm editor of special features at BloombergQuint, and I will be your host for today. Cloud has been key to helping businesses survive the disruption unleashed by the pandemic. But what happens next? How does cloud continue to drive business in this changed world that we live in and working with rapidly evolving digital trends? And as we're truly in the multi-cloud arena today, we need to find new ways for businesses to achieve new value amid uncertainty through the agility and the flexibility that cloud brings. Today, in this BloombergQuint conversation on the future of cloud, powered by HeroWire and part of our series Reimagining the Techverse, we will look at the latest trends. We will look at technology trends like multi-cloud, data clouds, etc. We will look at the opportunities for people, the opportunities for companies, as well as the challenges in the cloud space, and all of this from a business perspective. To help us do that today, we have two eminent guests today here with us. First up, we have Subram Natarajan, who is a renowned technology thought leader and currently serves as Director of Customer Engineering at Google Cloud. Next, we have Sanchit Gogia, who is one of Asia's best known and most respected analysts and serves as CEO and Principal Analyst at Greyhound Research. Thank you so much for being here, gentlemen.
Thank you, Ivor.
Thanks, Ivor.
Subram, thank you for being here. I wanted to start with you, right? We've had uncertainty, and I think like never before, as at least I've known it in my life for the past couple of years. And first it was COVID, and now there's war clouds. And what does all this continuing uncertainty and about the stop and start economy, and sometimes now in a blockaded economies, etc., mean for cloud strategy for a business, let's say in India?
Ivor, thanks for having me, first of all, in this session. It really is a great opportunity to share some of my thoughts here. In these days of uncertainties, in many ways, cloud has enabled, I would say, tremendous resilience to various businesses, and therefore it allows them to thrive successfully in times of uncertainty. When you take organizations that have chosen to undertake digital transformation, they have not only become immune to these disruptions, the start-stop that you just talked about, but also have built the foundation for what I call as the innovation. And this will allow them to help reach the market in a more agile manner. See, from a Google Cloud perspective, it boils down to addressing the needs of two different sets of companies, if you will. One that is tenured, that have established workloads, and these companies, and then there are these companies which are born on cloud. Now, essentially, when you talk about, in both cases, building cloud solutions essentially means fundamental characteristics of transformation has to be there right from get-go and need to be preserved as well. This means essentially four things, Ivor. First is, we need to ensure that the cloud environment has enough wherewithals to build what I call as a solid data platform. And this is because based on this only, you get the analytics as well as the AI that can be built on top of it to really help the business. And the idea would be to drive the insights into the business, and therefore it become a data-driven or insight-driven enterprise. Second, we need to provide freedom to the developers and customers to choose the technology stack in tune with the needs of the customers and the market. And this essentially means matching the needs of innovation and also being as open as possible with respect to the framework that they choose. The third point is about the stop-start style of business itself, right? So when we talk about disruptions, you need to have a solid collaboration platform that allows not only the employees themselves, but also the customers to kind of collaborate across the boundaries. And finally, we need to make sure there is enough trust in the cloud technology that is being adopted. So we need to protect everything that matters. That includes your data, your workloads, as well as customer data also. So a trusted cloud essentially becomes a pillar of delivering what I call as a transparency to the end customer. So if you really look at it, building these characteristics, these 4 characteristics that I talked about, enables the whole organization to withstand the start, stop, or any disruption for that matter quite easily. And that's precisely what organizations have done.
Thank you, Subram. And I guess what we'll do is during this conversation, I hope we'll get into depth into each of these characteristics. So moving on, Sanchit, I wanted to ask you about the stop and start challenge. And also, I wanted to ask you about how this has really driven the move towards multi-cloud, and especially with the focus on edge computing now, where closer to the customer, you have certain elements of cloud computing happening.
Right. So thank you, Ivo, first of all, for having me on the show. I really appreciate that. So look, I think what the last 24 months has done, there's been a seismic shift in the mindset of the decision makers, I would say. It's not really been a cost story from a cost optimization perspective, but it's been more about how do we become more agile? How do we sort of try new business models? I'll give you a classic examples. Hotel chains that were never sort of open to doing business otherwise were beginning to start delivering meals at home, for example. Or let's say even PVR Cinemas, for example, is now beginning to offer doorstep services from a cleaning perspective. Now that goes to show a lot of test and fail economy has also emerged on the back of this stop and start economy, which essentially means you need that underlying pools of infrastructure and resources, which are easy to get, are not expensive, and can also allow you to shut down instances if something doesn't really quite work. Now, just imagine, let's say, a large organizations, if they were to go through this entire cycle of procurement and purchase in the traditional world, doing a lot of these tests and trials for innovation would have been actually impossible. So this entire contactless economy was born on the back because these organizations were very open to now adopting cloud. However, having said that, referring back to what Subram said, actually, the born in the cloud in the startup world was, of course, very easy to adapt. They've already been on the cloud, so their challenges are very different. However, the larger organizations, which are audited 5-6 times a year, find themselves in quite the soup because, I was speaking to a bank the other day and he said, look, we have 185 applications. Now, although we want to move to the cloud, but the complexity in terms of the workloads we have, the kind of data we manage, the throughput we have, the volume, the velocity, and all of that makes it near impossible to lift and shift. So, we're seeing a lot of these organizations use a more medium-term approach wherein they're adopting clouds for the non-business critical applications, let's say an HRMS or a CRM to start with, where there is a great amount of handshake between the business and the IT. But at the more core infrastructure layer, we're seeing them take baby steps towards having a more distributed environment. So essentially a 3-pronged data center architecture, as I call it. One is the core DC, which is they're modernizing their core DC and they're building in private clouds, they're building in APIs to bring in other hyper clouds, these hyper providers. The second one is more around the edge cloud, which is, let's say, having an instance which is closer to the customer to ensure the response times are better, to ensure that the application on which the users are communicating or engaging with these organizations, that runs smooth, the customer experience as well. And last but not the least is a near DR. Now, let's not forget banking, for example, has a compliance mandate from RBI to have a 1:1 DR. But that may not be the case with everybody. So we have seen a dramatic shift in mindset, and so much so that even boards today are very open to talking about cloud. I remember the times, pre-pandemic, banking would never actually warm up to cloud because of the compliances and mindsets. But that's completely changed, I would say. And that has essentially enabled a lot of the test and fail economy, which otherwise would have been, taken decades for us to sort of come to.
Ivor, if I may, I want to complement what Sanchit was mentioning. When we really talk about hybrid multi-cloud, the reality is majority of the organizations are going to use a combination of clouds and open source software. That is given. And particularly in the Indian landscape, this is going to be more of a reality. So therefore, relying on single source provider or closed technology stack are not going to be the norm of the day. So therefore, when we are talking about customers trying to standardize because of their varied set of applications that are coming from multiple business units, or through acquisitions, they might have inherited a whole different type of applications, standardization becomes a huge headache. And that's where, to maintain a pure technology stack, especially in an environment where there is a lot of, differentiations, it becomes a big challenge. And that's where the open architecture is a choice of the day, right? Especially in a multi-cloud environment. So it gives the inevitable cloud advantage and sets the customer to address some of the needs of resilience. To an earlier point we made about the start-stop economy, here is another characteristics that allows you to make sure that the outages are combated properly through right kind of customer experiences. I mean, think of what big applications like Twitter, Walmart, OpenAI, and more close to home, Geo has done with respect to how they're adopting multi-cloud as a basis or edge as a basis to really deliver the customer experiences. So, this is going to be the norm of the day.
Actually, I love what Subram just said about open source. We're seeing that especially workloads like SAP, which have been very intense and expensive workloads, they were traditionally on VMware environments, but what we're traditionally now seeing is that SAP, for example, on Linux, is all of a sudden taking up because, the Linux, the cost structure is a lot more simpler, the skills are a lot more available. So open source as a bedrock is going through dramatic changes, and that's becoming the sort of the enterprise norm. For our Bombay Stock Exchange, for example, is fully open source from an architecture perspective. So that's a great point that Subram mentioned. I thought I'd share with you that that's a huge wave of change we're seeing again in the mindset from a DevOps and enterprise architect's perspective.
That's really fascinating examples that you brought here, both Sanchit and Subram. And that leads me to my next question. Clearly, multiple flavors of cloud are now the accepted norm. Open sources are driving much of this. Now, in this really this multi-cloud sort of economy, that companies are in, what should really CIOs do, Sanchit, when they are choosing a partner? What should be some of the key things that they keep in mind? Because clearly, you want to be open, etc. But at the same time, you have your business priorities, especially in sectors like BFSI, etc. What do you advise CIOs to?
So look, we're coming. I've been sort of working with a very few large organizations in India for a large transformation strategy on their cloud. And one of the first things I tell the organizations is that from an internal preparedness perspective, you ought to get your skill sets right up there. You ought to get your hands dirty with select workloads first. The fact that we have to first answer the question that do we even need a multi-cloud, or we just probably need a multi-instance from one cloud provider, and that's a huge debate. Look, going multi-cloud in theory is as easy as having this conversation like we're having, but multi-cloud in reality is expensive, unnecessary sometimes, and really over the top. So, the first thing to ask is, what are we building towards? What are some of the workloads? For example, how often do you want to do your capacity planning? To give you an example, banks, for example, earlier till date, in fact, have been doing capacity planning for 5 years. Now that is out of the window. You ought to sort of start, doing capacity planning 6 months, 12 months, simply because the amount of workloads you're going to be moving to the cloud is going to be very different. Also, I think, look, in reality, you can never move to a SaaS environment without essentially having a handshake with your business leaders. That's going to be impossible. Now, just imagine implementing an HRMS or let's say a Salesforce modernization platform without actually having a buy-in of people who are going to be using that on the ground. And that, I think, is a huge point of failure within a lot of these movements. And I think another thing is the readiness from a legality perspective. It's important to understand that when you are moving your data, your architecture, lifting and shifting it virtually to a cloud, data localization norms is a very small, but also very new sort of a field. And the fact is, a lot of these legal bodies within the large organizations do not have an innate understanding of what it essentially means to move data. Where will it be stored? I'll give you a classic example. India still till now doesn't really have a policy wherein end user organizations are doing active audits of the hyper cloud providers every 6 to 9 months. And the fact is that at some stage, these changes within the IT team first need to be institutionalized. They need to get a few workloads up and running, understand the pains and the challenges, and then go full blown. So I think from our perspective, when we work with clients, we sort of always advise them first have a roadmap for 5 years, then drill it down to, let's say, a 6 months, 12-month challenge, select workloads. Also, what happens is there are these industry-specific SaaS providers and industry-specific cloud providers. For example, banks today in the country are using other banks to host their data. So, it's important to understand where you want to what sort of partners you are open to working with as well. And there are lots of these questions to be answered on the way. So some of these points are what we typically discuss in these engagements.
So I want to add to the questions that Sanchit asked, and it's really important because, as we start looking at multi-cloud as a reality, I think the exam questions that we want to answer are, how do we get significantly smarter than today? Is multi-cloud going to allow me to do that? How do we transform while maintaining the freedom to adapt, say, some of the market-based needs of both the business as well as the IT? How do we connect people better, especially in the hybrid multi-cloud world, because all of a sudden you are going to have a larger diaspora? And lastly, how do we evolve in multi-cloud environment with the sufficient framework around security practice to protect everything that matters to us? So if you try to answer these things methodically, the answer to multi-cloud solution will emerge out quite naturally. For example, CryptoWire did exactly that. They kind of pivoted on bringing value through data analytics and AI, and therefore they kind of started really looking at multi-cloud as a means to get to their end. And similarly, Kia Motors, for example, for them it is the addressing the start-stop economy and the needs, how IT addresses that need became the number one requirement. And therefore, they started looking at this more as a building out a collaboration cloud. So, when you try to answer the business requirements through these simple 4 questions, I think your choice of architecture for multi-cloud will automatically emerge.
Absolutely. Subram, Sanchit also referred to, business decision makers now making their own decisions, right? When it comes to cloud. So I wanted to ask you, and since moving on from multi-cloud, this is another challenge today within especially large organizations, wherein business decision makers in a particular department choose their own application, and sometimes maybe even the cloud that it runs on, right? For instance, marketing could choose theirs. Finance could choose something, a SaaS application related to GST compliance, etc. So how can really business and tech better partner when it comes to cloud and software as a service, given this new challenge that's emerging? And how do we federate and better manage these environments?
Yeah, it's again a great question, right? And I think some of these responses to this is, Sanchit also alluded to this. If you were to really step back and look at where we have traversed this, initially it was all about, moving the VMs to cloud. Second, we started lifting and shifting a lot of traditional workloads to cloud. See, while these 2 early transformations to cloud migrations were really important, they were more IT driven rather than anything else. There was an element of cost associated with it, but then again, the return on investment often did not deliver the the compelling value proposition, particularly around the business transformation that one would hope for. So it hasn't fundamentally changed how business leaders and to a large extent even employees who work outside of IT would look at this transformation. And to your point, Ivor, it was just taking the old school IT and changing the operating model. So what we are really looking at right now is when we at Google Cloud, we spend quite a bit of time with some of the top tech companies, top enterprises in every industry, leading government agencies, and precisely on this issue. And when, given that the virtualization and infrastructure cloud is now real, what would really make the digital transformation take the next step in the evolution, right? And that is the real interesting conversation. And when we get to that phase, that's when the characteristics of transformation cloud emerges. We are just not making infrastructure decisions by truly embedding the need and capability, but also bringing the business element to it, to your point. Digitization is now becoming fundamental to that particular phase, and then move from what might have been a top-down corporate strategy and an initiative from an infrastructure to a fully infused transformation, letting every person in the team, in the organization, including the end customer, realize the benefit of cloud. Therefore, in the transformation era, or in the new way of looking at things, should attempt to really answer some of the questions I asked earlier, which is how do you get smarter? How do you connect people? How do you secure everyone? And so on, right? So these are the real crux of the questions one would want to ask when you bring in the business angle to the transformation.
Sanchit, another thing when you bring in the business angle is, I wanted to explore whether different kinds of organizations, now again, you speak to multiple CIOs from customer-facing organizations, from pretty close manufacturing organizations, etc. So how are they reacting to these trends differently? And do you see new revenue streams, for instance, arising out of cloud because of the way they react differently?
It's a brilliant segue. Thank you, Ivor. We did this prediction in 2018, and I really want to bring it out right now. So that by 2025, 50% of IT budget will actually reside with the CHROs, CMOs, and the CFOs. They are the guys who are really funding. And it's actually the technology leaders which are sort of scrambling there because they're not the decision makers. They're actually the enablers. So they sort of become the internal service providers. So there are two waves of change. One is business is becoming stronger. It's buying cloud on a swipe of a card. So much so there are times that the IT does not even know it owns a cloud. Okay, so and that comes to their surprise very often than not. Second of all, what's happening is even within by the way, this dichotomy also exists within the IT team. It's not unheard of that you get multiple AWS or Google Cloud instances within the IT team, and the bill swells up by the end of the month, and the finance knows that there are multiple teams using the same provider on back of their credit card. So now, what does this tell us? That the decision making has changed, first of all, and the decision makers have budgets of their own and veto powers of their own, and don't necessarily need to have a buy-in from the IT, which used to traditionally slow them down. So today a marketing team can go out and just buy a marketing cloud without really involving IT, and that's the huge force of change, and that's where the IT budgets have moved as well. Also, if you were to look at a little bit, let's say more the HRMS solutions or the CRM solutions, let's be honest, today you don't have an awful lot of choice if you want to go on-prem. Be it SAP, be it Oracle, be it Salesforce, you name the company, they're all pivoting to cloud models simply because one, there's demand for it, and second, the Wall Street analysts will kill you if your financials don't talk cloud revenue. So fact is, SaaS is a reality, and the more SaaS becomes a reality, the more business gets involved and the more budget gets out of the hands. Now, also, if you look at how cloud has changed from a SaaS perspective, earlier, as Subram mentioned, we were more on the core IT part of it. We were focusing on virtualization, DevOps, ensuring infrastructure works for the workload specific. What happened over the course of time was there was an entire period of exploration wherein the use cases were getting formed. Let's say HRMS was getting more solidified on the back of cloud. LMS was moving on to the cloud, and all of these point applications were slowly beginning to move on to the cloud. So what has happened on the last part, a decade, I would say, 7 or 10 years, is that a lot of these SaaS has become so mature that you have virtually no choice. But what's going to happen here on, it's going to be more industry-specific clouds. I'll give you an example. FSI, for example, has very, very strong compliance requirements. And the way you need to construct the workloads, the architecture, the expectations, the metrics, the KPIs need to be sort of, attuned to that in industry in specific. So and I'll give you another example. For example, blockchain. Now, the use cases of blockchain in FSI or versus use of blockchain, let's say, in healthcare are very, very different. So what we will see here on is a very industry-heavy orientation for this entire move. And the more industry-specific orientation comes in, the more industry-specific SaaS that would come in, you naturally would start targeting more business leaders. A great example or a proof in point is how these companies, RPA companies, have evolved. They don't speak to the CIO. They go and actually target the CHROs, the CMOs, and the chief operating officers. They start talking to them and start selling them cloud and RPA. Another great example is data clouds. The data cloud companies are actually not targeting CIOs just in isolation. They're actually going and talking to the CMO and saying that you have 5 different marketing applications. Let's bring in the data together. So it's a huge wave of change. And I think as industry-specific use cases start to become more solidified, as SaaS becomes larger, you will see the business handshake and IT handshake has to really, really grow. Now, the battle there is mindsets, because a CIO's role only becomes more solid only after when they start controlling more of IT. And I think that's the battle that I think both business and IT are fighting, because we've already seen many large organizations have moved large part of their IT teams to outsourcing companies simply because there's no need for it anymore. There's so much automation in the back of SaaS. So I think there's a battle between who manages what, and the more industry-specific use cases arise, the more business becomes important.
You alluded to data cloud, Sanchit, and this is the question I wanted to run by you also, Subram. Data cloud is certainly driving massive investment, with some calling it even a super cloud. And as Sanchit said, these deliver great value because they aggregate data from multiple clouds. So what are some of the opportunities and challenges here? Perhaps Subram, you could start, and Sanchit, you could also add to this, because I think this is a very important trend that we're seeing.
Absolutely, a very significant change that is happening, and essentially this is all about making your business smarter, right? And when you look at key drivers, I want to talk about 2 things. First is about how data itself enables business to become smarter and build the necessary value differentiation in what the customers experience. Businesses are now becoming smarter, and they are leveraging the cloud to be the platform which drives that significant change. More specifically, data to power their business. This is the data-driven business or insight-driven businesses. Essentially, it is about an ingredient that globally businesses can use to rocket fuel their business. So that is given. That is why there is so much excitement in the cloud market for data cloud. We have seen the growth and excitement of how data lakes are becoming more common from an organizational imperative, and why business intelligence has become part of every organization's optimization plans. Once the data is generated, then the smart analytic solution can allow companies to kind of democratize access to all business data. If you recall, this business data and intelligence used to be sort of accessible only to a small set of data analysts or AI specialists and so on. And this data cloud is a main means of how the data and insights can be democratized to all stakeholders, and that too at scale. When you add the self-service and visualization capabilities, acceleration to insights and making sure that gets integrated into the business becomes a lot more powerful and a reality. Now, if you add the artificial intelligence on top of this, which is the second part I want to talk about, this is a force multiplier. The business value realization cycles will be much faster and that much more amplified. And, more importantly, this is where solutions like delightful customer experiences, preventing fraud and increasing manufacturing efficiency, they will all become relevant in respective industries, whether it is FSI or retail or, supply chain and so on. Cloud platform itself is become more of an essential ingredient to provide this innovation. And I can give examples of, again, Twitter or Major League Baseball, who have built the data cloud, and they realized benefits exactly what I just talked about, right? So this has become sort of, the fundamental characteristic, the bedrock of any insight-driven enterprise, so to say.
It's fascinating what Subram said, and allow me to jump in if I can, please. Okay, so I'll start by talking about a meeting that I had with the chief strategy officer of one of India's large conglomerates. Very fascinating conversation. I got this call at noon, and he said, pop into my office at 2 o'clock. You're in Bombay. I've managed to go to that even point. So I finally landed there. The first question they said, look, we produce 20 billion data points a year. Now, we are in the business of manufacturing, financial services, all of that, but we produce 20 billion data points a year. So the question they had for me is that how can we use this data, not from anything, but from a monetization perspective? And because the API economy is becoming so real, can we use this data to, let's just sell better insurance products? Can we use this data to probably co-launch a new product with a startup, for example? So I think the way that you can use data, and gone are the days when you just use data from an internal consumption perspective. I think data today is, I know it sounds very cheesy, but the data is the oil virtually, or oil is the oil, whatever. But data virtually has become that engine that allows you to spring growth on the back of, right? And I think that's where there's been a fundamental change in mindset at chief strategy officers, at executive board level, that what can we do with this data, not just from an internal operational efficiency perspective, but from a market facing and participating in the API economy. That's a fundamental change. Now, you see, why did we even reach there, and why is data cloud important? Let's understand that first. Traditionally, what we've had is that these large organizations have made a ton of investments in traditional on-premise data warehousing architecture. They've invested then in Hadoop clusters on cloud. Then they've invested a lot of money in network appliances that were sold by some of large boys in the game like IBM and the others. Now, all of a sudden, what they have is this three-pronged heavy investments in this architecture, and again being used by 5 business analysts who produce 10 reports a month, which get consumed 30 days after the business cycle is over. So which means everything is prorated, everything is delayed, and the outcome, there is no ROI. So, these organizations have struggled with the democratization of data internally. Now, all of a sudden comes in SaaS, and every SaaS provider has their own dashboard. Every SaaS provider will want you to use their own analytics. Then comes in the infrastructure as service guys like the Amazons and the Googles. They have their own excellent dashboard. But the point is, how many dashboards can an organization consume beyond the point? And that's where data cloud really comes in, is because there is so much of disparate data clouds across that you need a layer of abstraction on top of that that essentially allows you to make sense. Now, it is absolutely relevant today. Why? Because customer journeys are changing. Now, I'll give you an example. If you're in retail, if you launch a campaign to move customers from online to offline or vice versa, there's absolutely no way for you to track the customer journey if the data isn't actually in a single console. Now, and irrespective of what any vendor would say, look, the Kool-Aid of a single customer view has been sold for the last 20 years, and it hasn't been realized until now. Now, to manage the complexity of the data which is floating around in pockets across the organization, data cloud becomes absolutely fundamental. However, having said that, look, data cloud comes in with a lot of expense. It's an intense environment. It will require for the organization to actually invest in resources that can use the data cloud. I tell you why, because ultimately you will have to be able to justify the costs around it. You will have to be able to consume the investments that you're doing. So our data cloud in ideal world is going to be very important. The issue being, back to what we started from, is ROIs. How do we use this data cloud? What do we use it for? And how do we actually ensure and actually show results in the back of? I'll give you an example. We're doing a POC right now. We're part of the creation of an RFP for a large company which is using data cloud and wants to use data cloud. One of the metrics of measurement is that if we use data cloud, will it help improve sales from our website? Today we do 20 crores. Will it go to 100 crores? Can we show a direct correlation? If we cannot show a direct correlation, why even invest? So I think these are the big question marks ahead of organizations who are trying to explore and need to actually have a data cloud in place.
Well, that really has been fascinating. I want to know, we're running out of time, so I just want to deal with some of the other questions I have. And one of them really, since we started talking about stop and start economy, etc., risk plays a huge role over there. So Sanchit, can you tell us a little bit about the impact of cloud on a company's risk posture and the role of compliance really over here? What are some of the trends you're seeing over here?
Yeah, and I'll try and keep my answer short in the interest of time. Look, there is absolutely no environment called the zero risk environment. One ought to be real. I think every organization today wants to have or needs to have a certain appetite to risk. Now, the question mark is, how do you measure risk and how is it changing, right? It's changing because you never had APIs earlier. You never had a data exchange. You never had to sort of participate in an industry cloud, or you never actually had to exchange data with a startup to co-create a product. So I think the levers of who uses data, plus there was also no sensitivity either of data privacy being such a big topic. In fact, India today still doesn't have a very strong data privacy legal architecture from that standpoint. We're still struggling, and that's why people are still abusing India from a test and trials and abusing Indian data. So I think the role of compliance is significant. In the more compliant industries like FSI, you will see better postures. However, I think organizations internally are beginning to try and measure what sort of and the new agents of risk they onboard as they work with new partners, with new technology on the back of APIs, as they also even onboard new vendors who they haven't ever worked with. For example, the old saying goes, right? You never get fired for hiring an IBM. Guess what? You're hiring more than IBM today. You're hiring Snowflake, for example. You're hiring new smaller companies who probably don't even have an India presence. People who don't even have an India billing system for that matter. So these are all risks, and these levers need to be managed. So that is why we see larger companies now have a position called the CRO, the Chief Risk Officer, which is getting equipped to handle a lot of these conversations around API, around GDPR, and all of these compliance postures are actually improving. What's also happening on the other side of the table is that there's something called self-compliance. Now, if you were to look at it, say Netflix and the others, they're under tremendous pressure to be able to, one, communicate to the customer what sort of data is collected about them, and more importantly, there are census issues. So let's say if people don't like a certain topic, is there a way to manage that data? Is there an additional risk to the organization? So I think it's very contextual, and I think there's always going to be risk that organizations will onboard, but simply because banks today have more APIs, they're exchanging more data, there are new partners you are co-creating with and using their technology off. I think the risk has totally changed, and I think the Chief Risk Office has a new challenge ahead in terms of quantifying and, more importantly, qualifying the risk, I would say.
I want to add to what Sanchit was mentioning. There's more to do with how you complement the risk posture by providing sufficient levels of protection, security. And it's about trusting the cloud or trusted cloud, right? So for example, at Google Cloud, it is about defending the data against threats and fraudulent activity using the same infrastructure and security services that we use for our own operations. And you can imagine the kind of scale and complexity that we operate with, and then empowering the customers with the advanced capabilities that would otherwise be unavailable, right? So, and this is the reason why, the trusted cloud as a basic premise for the transformation is necessary. Now, if you were to really look at this core concerns around the risk that you referred to, it's about enabling safer access, simplifying the secure access to kind of service of employees, customers, and so on, protecting against threats, and providing a very clear visibility and the need to find and analyze and resist threats that is facing the business. And finally, having the strategy, and Sanchit alluded to this a little bit earlier, to take advantage of some of the innovations that are happening on cloud while meeting all the sovereignty and governance requirements to maintain the control posture. So, it is essentially built on three pillars, Ivor. One is the secure platform that delivers the transparency required, as well as the sovereignty required to make sure that data is sufficiently safeguarded and protected and in your control. And the second is providing a zero trust architecture. And this is about battle-tested technology that companies like Google has provided. And last but not least, we are moving away from a shared fate or moving towards a shared fate kind of a posture as against shared responsibility. And this is an interesting thought process. It is not only about providing the infrastructure and technology, but also taking the customers all the way to how they realize the benefits of IT and security till the time they deliver the services and products to their end customers. So, a lot of things are changing here and changing for the good to make sure that, trusted, cloud is in place and making the customers, business successful in a secure manner.
Can I just add something to that? I think there's a very important point that Subram just raised. I think there are two concepts. One is GRC, one is cybersecurity. And I think these are two different streams that ultimately impact the overall risk of the organization. And we are seeing an immense amount of investment that organizations are making, of course, on the cybersecurity posture as well. But we shouldn't confuse the risk posture to the cybersecurity posture. They're two different things, right? So I think there's an important point that doesn't get discussed often, that GRC and cybersecurity are two different fields, go hand in hand, affect each other's decisions, but you cannot have either or. It's an and strategy. So that's all.
That's a very important reminder, Sanchit. Thank you for that. I wanted to finally come down to, I think one thing is clear, that cloud is enabling new ways of doing business, really emerging from this stop and start economy. And it's very clear what are some of the drivers. So I wanted to ask you, Subram, in terms of jobs, etc., what are you really seeing on this front? And what do people who want to upskill themselves and be ready for this new cloud-driven work environments? What do they need to do?
Yeah, see, the transformation is real, and in this cloud era, the alignment of cloud outcomes are going to be increasingly tightly aligned to the outcome of the business. So you will see specializations like data analytics, artificial intelligence, collaboration, security in a cloud environment. That will become sort of, will gain the center stage, so to say, and they will emerge strongly, and therefore they will provide a very rich set of career options. Industry solutions in the context of cloud environments will make use of some of the abundant capabilities that cloud provides. For example, telehealth or merchandising solutions, financial solutions that are all available on cloud, and you will see lot more, career options that will be born out of this, right? Specifically on the data cloud, data ops, ML ops, DevOps, data visualization, data literacy. These are all going to be specializations, and therefore provide a very rich set of career options or possible options that will come out. And same thing exists with cybersecurity also. There's a lot of specializations there. These are all becoming the here and now kind of choices companies are making, and therefore, excellent choices.
I think we've really run out of time. We've had such a rich discussion. I think at the end of this, I wanted to ask you all if you all could perhaps take just a minute to identify maybe the top 3 cloud trends for the next 1 year, perhaps, if at all that's possible. So maybe Subram, you want to go first?
Yeah, why 3? We'll go with 4. Data cloud, the openness and open source adoption along with cloud framework, the collaboration part of it, and finally security. So all these things will become a very strong set of premise for cloud to grow and evolve.
I have a different spin. Subram did a great justice to the trends. I have 5 C's of the cloud, or 5 things that I think are going to be very important in cloud. One is going to be the business of cloud. Look, it's not the same as the technology of cloud. The business of cloud means things like legality, GRC, and all that we spoke about. Second is the technology of cloud, which is engineering hardcore product guys, who get their hands dirty and actually make products. So that's the second wave that we'll see a lot of change in. Third is the research of cloud. Look, I think there's an entire new body of research which is coming out there talking about how to manage AI, how to do automation and data management and workflows. And that's the research of cloud, more forward-looking and not really consumed within today. The fourth thing is the security of cloud. Again, a huge stream of topic, which I think deserves justice on its own. And the fifth thing is the data of cloud. So business of cloud, technology of cloud, research of cloud, security of cloud, and the data of cloud. I think these are 5 things. Why am I doing 10? I have 5 things which I think are going to define how cloud matures here on. And I think for any organization wanting to sort of really champion cloud, these are 5 areas they must understand very closely, I would say.
Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. We've had a really fascinating discussion, understanding some of the new cloud trends that we are seeing today, some of the new technologies that we're seeing today in this front multi-cloud. We've really explored that data clouds. And I think more importantly, we've understood how they really matter to a business and how businesses and business leaders can really use them better. Thank you so much, Sanchit and Subram, for joining us here. We really appreciate you on this BloombergQuint conversation on the future of cloud, powered by HeroWide. And we really want to thank you for taking us through this really insightful, exciting journey. And I'm sure the future really seems bright. It's definitely the future is on the cloud. It definitely is a very bright future. Thank you so much.